As always, it's a pleasure to be in Johnston County. A lot of friends, a lot of people I've worked with for years. Chris Johnson is always a pleasure to work with. And like me, we know what we're talking about most of the time. Derwin Stevenson, a longtime friend. Then I saw another friend of mine I haven't seen in a while, Alan Wellens, who I have not seen him in quite a while. Alan, we may not recognize each other if we wait another 15 years to see each other. You know, my son, who's a rising junior, I took him with me not too long ago, and I had to speak, and I asked him, when I finished, I said, what did you think of the speech? His comment was, Dad, it really doesn't matter what you say as long as you say it with passion. So I'm not quite sure that that was a compliment or telling me I needed to get some passion in what I'm talking about. You know, in opportunity zones, we're here today, it's kind of hard to get real passionate about opportunity zones at some point too, but it is a reality. I want to bring you greetings from Governor Cooper. He's actually in Columbus County today with corporate job announcements down there. You know, when I heard you talking about a few minutes ago about the highways down here, when you first opened it, there was no one on it, look in the rearview mirror. I go to China quite often. I've been going for about 20 years. About 15 years ago, I was in Jinan, China, in the Shandong province. And they picked me up in a car, and we drove for 4 hours on a 20-lane highway that I never saw another car. Preparing for the future, the infrastructure that the Chinese have been building for the last 30 years is just astounding. And they continue to do that. And, you know, with the growth that we're having, you talk about smart growth, I think we're going to have to prepare a lot too. And being prepared is one of the things I want to talk about a little bit. As county commissioners and as any legislators here or county commissioners? Well, you have to invest a lot early before you may never see the shade for the tree that you invest in and go in debt for, and perhaps lose an election for doing that. I mean, it takes years. I see projects all over the state that they actually started developing the sites 30 years ago. It takes that long to get all the infrastructure and everything ready. One of the things you have here going for you, I guess, is good and bad, is the exponential growth that you're having and how fast it's happening. And I'm not sure you probably feel like you can't run fast enough to keep up with it. Believe me, there are other problems when you got 40 out of 100 North Carolina counties losing population. And that's another whole set of problems that I think they would exchange for what you may perceive as a problem. Opportunity zones. You know, the idea actually originated during the Obama administration. It's where it actually started. And it took it a lot of maturations, a lot of work, and it finally took place with President Trump. About a month and a half ago, President Trump actually called the Secretaries of Commerce, or invited all of us to the White House. And we met with the President and Secretary Mnuchin, and it was about opportunity zones. But you know, it's only been a couple of months, they finally finished with the regs that are happening with opportunity zones. The other thing that's been quite a misconception, it's sort of a trick box for the North Carolina Department of Commerce in some ways. We have actually no control over what happens with these, where the investments go, or likewise. It's totally by the Treasury Department and federally run. Our involvement, other than helping navigate through some of those things, our involvement was working with you and other counties in selecting where you put these opportunity zones in your counties. The rules are codified in congressional statute. One of the things we're constantly asked for, well, we don't like the one that was selected in my county, can you change them? The answer is no. It would take Congress to do that. That is not something that I prescribe. Are there contiguous zones? No. Like in the EB-5 program, they have EB-5 is when if you invest $1 million in a foreign country, you can get and you create like 20 jobs, I believe it is, you become a permanent resident green card. You're issued. They have contiguous zones that can be, if you butt up against another one, you qualify. This has little of the flexibility that's given in that program. But you can see billions of dollars of economic development. Where I have seen the ones around the country, some people just lucked out and they happen to have projects that are coming in an opportunity zone. But the number one issue is the investor's going to look at this, can I make money? It's not necessarily a social program. If it makes money and it turns out good for mankind, that's probably where it's going to happen. According to the UNC School of Government, 46% of all census tracts in North Carolina would qualify for an opportunity zone, but the federal government only let us designate 25% of those tracts. Johnston County has some of those tracts. With local input, we identified opportunity zones based on 5 guidelines. We identify at least one in every county. In some counties, the whole county is an opportunity zone based on the poverty of the counties. We consider 25% of each county's low-income tracts. We study recommendation and development goals of local officials, and we help review state industrial site development initiatives and help pinpoint areas that are vulnerable for flooding and hurricanes, which has become an all too familiar occurrence for us in what we're doing. We've built some homes back 3 times, just to tell you what we're dealing with in disaster recovery and hurricanes. But in May of 2018, the Treasury certified 252 areas as North Carolina opportunity zones for the future. With a total population of 1.1 million people reside in those opportunity zones. Nearly 45,000 children in the poverty level reside in those opportunity zones also. Over 50,000 business establishments are in them, and there's already been over $580 million invested in these areas from public and private sources in the past 5 years. Since the real legislation passed, Capital Analytics has reported site sales in opportunity zones are up 80% for the first 3 quarters of 2018 as compared to the same time in 2017. And the developments keep increasing. The legislation is a free market approach, and we know the more guidelines for reporting and measuring success are forthcoming. I fully expect that the guidelines will continue to change. I can't know that for sure. I would hope that they would allow some contiguous zones to be allowed too. They're not necessarily poverty zones because work patterns are going to cross over between those zones. Eastfield, your development. What an incredible future I think you could have there with opportunity zones. It's eligible for powerful tax breaks, a temporary tax deferral on capital gains invested in this opportunity fund, stepped up basis for capital gains reinvested in an opportunity fund, and a permanent exclusion from taxable income of capital gains for at least 10 years. North Carolina's program is designed to encourage long-term job creation and economic activity, housing, and other community investments. One of the things about opportunity zones that Congress and the White House and Secretary Mnuchin worked on in doing this, they encourage you to stack other incentives on top of this when you do development. So you're not limited by taking the tax exclusions. In fact, we would welcome the opportunity if companies would come in to use our whole toolbox of incentives to put on top of that, which could be incredibly meaningful and a lot more robust than just the tax treatment. With the development plans, you'll create 3,100 jobs and an investment of $287 million over 353 acres. What an incredible game changer for Johnston County. But let me go to another issue again, what I talked about, being prepared. The winners in economic development are the ones that are prepared. Everyone tells me, I go around the state, we have a great site for a company. It's just real estate until it's prepared. When the Toyota project, which I was working on year before last, which would have been about 3,000 jobs in the Guilford County, Randolph County area, there were some challenges for having the site prepared at that time. They had an 18-month window that they wanted to be in production. They said for every hour they would book $86,000 for every hour they were late in their production schedule. So you can figure any company coming to look at you, that's what they're booking it. They're looking at some fraction of $86,000 if they're not on. So if there's any doubt about them being on their schedule, you'll be excluded whether they tell you or not when they look at it, whether it's through social media or when they come to visit. In good economies and in challenging economies, readiness and preparedness are paying dividends. We're doubling the efforts of the Department of Commerce. One of the things I want to do is really move the Department of Commerce in a way that we're going to deal with helping communities be prepared. That would be like revamping the certified site program. What does that really mean? We need to go in and analyze when you're going, not only water, sewer, broadband capabilities, natural gas. There's some counties that are 40 miles from a natural gas line. They will never get manufacturing. So when we talk about rural economic development and you're not talking about infrastructure, I'm not sure that you're really serious about economic development in rural areas without that. Highways, incredibly important, and airports are incredible. And rail is another important phenomenon that everyone looks for proximity. I was listening to you about the rail here. That's an incredible opportunity for you, I believe. I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 4 years when they were putting the rail in Washington through Arlington, Virginia. I remember Arlington had 2-story buildings all the way out to Vienna. Now you'd think you were on Fifth Avenue in a corridor of high rises. That will happen here too if passenger rail comes about. We're working also with that. We're encouraging that. You know, there was a big effort this year in the Triangle, the light rail to Durham. That was not successful. I think that just means we have to double down and continue to look at that. And I do admire you for looking at that and preparing for the future in that. The next thing is talent. No company's going anywhere where they expect the employees to fall out of an airplane. They're just not coming if they determine that they've got to import all the talent. I was with the 5th largest bank in the world about 2 months ago, which by the way is Japanese, and the top four are Chinese. None of the top 5 are American banks. And they said, if you're going to do any type of fintech or financial services company, you have to look at North Carolina now if you're expanding in the world, just because of the talent that we have here, especially along the I-85 corridor, which for all practical effects, you're part of that too now. One of the things that I was coming back from the UK several months ago, and I was reading the Financial Times, and it was talking about the University of Manchester, a new concept they've invented called innovation hubs, where you have universities and the companies around it are commercializing products. I mean, they must not have read the News and Observer in 1960 when we did that with the Research Triangle Park. We invented that concept here in the United States, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, as you recall, Terry Sanford was the only Southern governor that supported John Kennedy, and his predecessor became U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and just by coincidence, the EPA became the anchor tenant in the Research Triangle Park. And from there, we've seen what's going on. One of the things we're looking at the Department of Commerce with a lot of our development is actually 60 miles around university hubs and cities, but you clearly fall way within that corridor. And if you look at the hub and spoke development around North Carolina, a lot of it's taking place like that, whether it's Johnston County, Rocky Mount, Tarboro, Wilson. 15% of Wilson's workforce commutes to Raleigh every day. 52% of Charlotte's workforce does not live in Mecklenburg County. So travel patterns in North Carolina are rather long. And most consultants, I think Chris would tell you, they don't believe that. They look at employment 12 miles around the development of a facility. They find that they dismiss many times, unless you prove otherwise, that your workforce is larger than a 12-mile circle around the operation that you're putting. But in North Carolina, it's not unusual for people to travel 50 miles to work. You talk about talent in North Carolina. Any given hour, we have over 700,000 students in North Carolina enrolled in community colleges across the state. I mean, you can look at what the community colleges do here with life sciences and the like for their training. We graduate 55,000 university graduates in North Carolina every year. And the Research Triangle Park is the highest per capita concentration of PhDs in the world. I mean, we are a knowledge-based economy. Just look at Johnston County. When I graduated from university in 1978, you would drive down here and you thought of everything outside of Raleigh and Durham. Even Raleigh and Durham, especially Durham, was a tobacco-centric town. Now it's gigabits and megabytes and life sciences and Grifols and Novo Nordisk and the like. You're known all over the world. I have to give a shout for Grifols and their development of the treatment and cure for Ebola. But they don't talk about it a whole lot, but it ought to be on the BBC, and that's right here in Johnston County. What an incredible accomplishment. So what are employers facing today? Rural employers, as urban employers, are facing some of the same problems. We did a survey with rural North Carolina employers. 75% of them seeking applicants are getting no applicants. I'm not talking about qualified, no applicants. You say, why is that? Well, one of the things I think, we're at 4.1% unemployment, that if you take out the people that are now entering the workforce and in migration, we're probably below 3% of a real unemployment rate, which means there's a workforce shortage. The other thing is, if you look at the companies coming to rural areas now, it's robotics. It's all IT-centric. It's no longer, even if they did make socks, it'd be made by a robot and it would be automated with somebody behind a computer screen. No longer will there be a need for unskilled labor is going to have a tough time in the future. What we're seeing in the next 20 years, 67% of all graduates will need a degree past high school and probably past community colleges to be employed. One of the things the Department of Commerce has refocused on, most of the workforce programs are either under the community colleges or NC Works is under the Department of Commerce. The first part of this century until actually we got there, our workforce programs will be geared to rapid response. That means layoffs. We're basically having very few plant closures or layoffs. And the first 3 years of this century, it was about 60,000 a year were being laid off because of WARN notices. That means over 100 were being laid off. That doesn't take into account when there were smaller layoffs than 100. Right now, we're seeing virtually no WARN notices come out during the year, which is a really good thing. We're seeing the first time in 20 years, we're seeing a lot of pressure on wages going up. If you're an employee, that's a good thing, I suppose. But the challenge North Carolina's got to do is continue to work on workforce. And we're doing some innovative things. We're testing one project in Edgecombe and Nash County. In the next couple of years, they need between 2,500 and 3,000 employees to fill vacancies in life sciences and the tire industry and other manufacturing. We have 11 community colleges collaborating, putting together, develop a curriculum for that area. I hope to copy that around the state. It will be unique for other areas. We're also working with the community colleges and rolling out a more robust apprentice program. Companies like Freightliner, New Egger Wood Products, which is a project that we bought in since we've been here from Austria. They in Davidson County in Lexington, they're following a German model. Bosch down in New Bern has a German model. But we hope to work with your companies and other companies with the apprentice programs going forward so that they have a pipeline of employees. Most of that starts around the 10th grade, and they combine with going to school and perhaps working in whatever the industry is. By the time that they are second year community college, they would probably move in a higher capacity in that company. Also, what North Carolina we've done in the recent years, we've taken the glass ceiling off of community college and say, what does that mean? Well, when Chris and I were growing up, our parents all wanted us to be doctors and lawyers, and there was a stigma perhaps attached to community colleges with technical school. Today, you can actually continue that career past the community colleges and go to a four-year university. Most don't, but by removing that ceiling, I think the stigma's gone, and we're really having a robust, plus the cost of the universities. Community colleges are much more affordable alternative than many of our universities, especially the one I went to, which I think the combined tuition's about $75,000 a year. That's Duke, and I happened to go on a scholarship by Clinton Toms, was the first president of American Tobacco Company, named by James Duke, and he left a scholarship in Hertford through the Episcopal Church to kids from Paquimans County to go to Duke, and so I got that. So tobacco did educate me. When we're looking at logistics and transportation and highways and broadband, 80% of the cost of a car is logistics of an automobile. Moving parts in and then moving the automobile out. But most of it's assembling parts from the supply chain from around the world when it comes in. We don't think of an automobile that way, that it's actually, most of the cost is logistics, but that is one of the things. And we find products from all over the world. JLL says that most companies, that 50% of their operating costs are actually driven by transportation expenses. So time is money. E-commerce. We're looking at e-commerce coming about, and what's that doing? You know, we're looking at now eBay, and we look at imports and exports. Companies that use eBay find that their international markets increase over 100%, and they end up shipping just through the internet, and the use of eBay is one of the largest advertising and marketing tools that we're seeing emerge. It's just an incredible phenomenon that who would have ever thought of that? That's where I'm going to get to broadband. Broadband's kind of my business that I grew up in, putting fiber in. I was on the MCNC board of directors when during the Obama administration that through the stimulus money and Golden Leaf and the stimulus money and the MCNC board, we put $146 million of broadband infrastructure in North Carolina. Those are the kind of commitments that we've got to put in to address it. $10 million a year is not going to move the needle going forward. And it's, like I say, it's more than just education, but it's important too. Most companies are not going to go locate anywhere that the children of their company have to go to a McDonald's to use Wi-Fi to do their homework at night. It's just imperative that we address that. Secretary Trogdon and some of the development that we're doing, especially on the I-70 corridor, there will be conduit laid on that, and there will be fiber infrastructure, or at least conduits to sell to private companies to increase the capacity, at least from Raleigh to the coast. Those are the kind of smart and innovative things we've got to continue to do for broadband. Here's my number. 57% of eBay sellers export to more than 10 international markets. And that's usually out of somebody's home, what they're doing. Now let me just finish with one thing. A healthy workforce, but I won't even look at that necessarily. A healthy workforce, I'll just look at it from an economic development point of view. What would you do for a project that would bring 43,000 jobs to the state in the next 4 years? Or bring 773 jobs to Johnston County? If I were going to bring a project, Chris, to you with 773 jobs, you'd stand on your head for me to do that. That's what Medicaid expansion would do for Johnston County. It would bring 4,700 jobs to Wake County, 3,200 jobs to Greensboro, 1,500 jobs to New Hanover County, 760 jobs to Robertson County, and billions of dollars of investment that it would bring. And it would save many of our rural hospitals that are closing left and right. I assure you, no company is going to locate anywhere that that they expect their employees to travel 2 hours to go to a hospital. And there are areas of that state that's happening to. So I would urge you to look at Medicaid expansion as an economic development project as much as it is providing health care. We are paying for that anyway. They're utilizing emergency rooms. It would reduce corporate insurance premiums by a minimum of 7% is what we're seeing. So just from an economic development tool, it is a major thing for us to do. In closing, I want to commend you and your colleagues here for what they say, leadership's the ability to see and create the future. And that's what you've done and continue to do in Johnston County. Not every county has the leadership that you do. Continue to do what you're doing. We admire you for this. Just remember about change. In 1950, North Carolina was the second poorest state in the country. We consolidated the university system. We created the community colleges. And in 1982, the headline of the New York Times was, North Carolina's, you have the South and you have North Carolina. North Carolina is the Dixie Dynamo. And we're known around the world. I'm the luckiest guy in the world to have a job like this. Anyway, thank you for inviting me, and anytime I can help you. I do enjoy working with your colleagues and you. Once again, not to pander too much to Chris, but he's delightful to work with too. And I work for Derwin Stevenson. Thank you.